Hi everyone. Wanted to take a moment and provide some context for two things. First of all, I want to give you kind of an overview of universal design for learning. So something that we've been pretty passionate about as a tool and framework um, for carrying out equity work, especially as we talk about designing how to design instruction, and especially as well as thinking about how do you personalize learning. So if we think of personalized learning as a component of kind of our work around equity, and the question often is, well, how in the heck do you personalize learning? How do you plan that instruction? So Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, is something that we'll use for that and something I'll explore in this video. But first I wanted to talk about, kind of give a 50,000 foot look here, kind of an aerial view of our work that we're doing, and specifically focused on and starting with kind of the work we're doing at Savannah Oaks, Core Knowledge, Badger Ridge, and in collaboration with one another. So if we kind of understand the why we're doing what we're doing. So back in 14-15, that was my first year at Badger Ridge. And really the first thing that I noticed was, hey, we need to really set clear targets for our learning. If we're going to do any of the other work around UDL, personalized learning, high quality assessment practices, grading and reporting, if we're really to dig into any of that, the first and foremost, the thing you have to accomplish is, do we have clear targets for what we expect of students and their learning at each of the grade levels? So that work was started in 14-15. Then in at the beginning of the 15-16 school year, the Board of Education really said, we don't understand why there's such a discrepancy in the middle school experience between Savannah Oaks and Badger Ridge in particular. And so the really kind of three things set out with that group, looking at the grading and assessment systems at each of the schools and really coming to some commonality there. Coming to guaranteed and viable curriculum, and really what that's getting at is the work that had already been started at Badger Ridge around learning progressions, and work that had already been started and really completed it at Savannah Oaks around creating power standards. And so what we found is just finding some collaborative time for department members of the two schools to get together. We were able to accomplish a lot of that. And then the last thing is common courses and time. And so by common courses, I'll give you an example. Why does Savannah Oaks offer German and Badger Ridge, or I'm sorry, why does Badger Ridge offer German and Savannah Oaks doesn't? On the flip side with time, why does Savannah Oaks have 80 minutes for math and language arts each day and Badger Ridge only has 43? So then that takes us to where we are today, where we're really kind of exploring some of these getting a little more granular in our work. So, now that we have learning progressions, how do we make that into usable practices in the classroom? And so that's through UDL. How do we take assessment principles that were developed between the two middle schools last year, and really core knowledge included, so the three middle schools, and turn those into actual classroom assessment practices, and beginning the conversation about aligning our instructional priorities with instructional time. So that takes us into then really digging into UDL. So Universal Design for Learning, again, kind of pointing out our district mission that every learner must be successful, and kind of then how does that lend into what UDL is? So UDL is the idea that all learners have the supports and challenges needed for meaningful access to curriculum and instruction. Recognizing that there's currently opportunity and achievement gaps in our students' experiences. And so how do we plan instruction to minimize and or eliminate those? UDL promotes best teaching practices of both collaboration and responsive teaching, and it really puts an emphasis on pre-planning or co-planning versus adapting on the fly. And that really kind of often lends itself to our resource staff, but also our general educators who may have planned a lesson and then suddenly it's like, oh yeah, this kid what can we do differently for that student? So UDL is trying to think about and anticipate the needs of a variety of students ahead of time. So kind of big picture. So starting with the equity framework in Verona and our commitment to equity, that's really the why are we doing this, is because we are committed to providing equitable learning opportunities and experiences. And so then that trickles down to, well, how are we going to do that? And that's where really we get into talking about personalized learning. And then what do we need to do? Well, we need to really kind of look at high quality teaching and learning for all. And that's where we really get into UDL. So I'm going to give you, I'm not going to play these videos, but I'll pass along this PowerPoint and we'll let you take a look. But I think it really gives you a look at UDL and what the difference is between maybe the way we've done classroom instruction in a traditional classroom, and then what a classroom might look like, a classroom experience may look like for students from a UDL lens. So just another cartoon here that really kind of illustrates UDL. And again, I think UDL was originally kind of, I think, created around the mindset of, inclusive practices for students with special needs. And really what we found out, and really the goal of UDL, and really when you think about universal design in architecture, where UDL kind of got its start, is that we found in architecture and in construction, if we built, rather than building a ramp as an add-on, if we built the ramp and it was accessible for all, suddenly the usability and the usefulness of that ramp became much more usable for many situations. So and the architecture of that then completely changed. So in this cartoon, the person at the individual in the wheelchair at the bottom of the cartoon, but if you shovel the ramp, we all can get in. And so that's really what UDL is thinking about. All right, how do I plan for my most diverse learners? Thinking about that may open up avenues for really all learners to engage or access or express learning in different ways. So really kind of thinking about our goals of this work, I think starting points is beginning with learning progressions or power standards to help create UDL experiences, and then have students help create class or personal goals. And so that's something that, and I think student choice is a huge part of this. So then if we look here, and there's a link here that you can click on that give you some tips for assessment for UDL, but really kind of this cyclical process that you can go through as you're thinking about and planning UDL lessons, and then also thinking about where this work is rooted in, and it's really rooted in brain research, thinking about the ways in which we acknowledge that varying parts of the brain light up differently for varying kids. And in some kids, different parts of the brain are more highly developed and or develop differently or fire differently. And so how do we create learning experiences that take into to account all of these, really the three different parts of the brain illustrated here, and then knowing that within each of those parts of the brain, there are different strengths, there are different brain pathways, neural pathways that are stronger than others in individual students. So looking first at engagement, and again, there's a link here if you click on that with the PowerPoint that I've shared with you. But really, kind of this takes you again through each of those networks, those brain networks, the recognition network, the strategic network, and the affective network. And really, the affective network is really where I think we actually should be starting, and where we're starting here with engagement. I think that engagement in that affective network is the most important as far as to begin the learning process. Like, how do we really hook learners into what we're expecting of them? And then thinking about all of the things that come into then creating that personal learner profile. How do we really know who our kids are to begin with? And then how does that link into UDL? And so creating that personal learner profile and creating then a classroom learning profile. And so to think about UDL, you start off with really four um, four students in mind, four varying students, four students that, and they may be at different, have completely different strengths, completely different, areas that they're struggling in learning, as far as what are some, some barriers that they may experience in their learning. Um, and it could be a kid that is just, is has got the material mastered, to a student that is really struggling to even engage in anything in the classroom, and really kind of thinking about what is that student's strengths, what are those students' passions, their talents, how they learn, their interests, and then specific weaknesses. Um, so really kind of thinking about that, and then putting to test as you're planning. All right, how are we going to engage that student? And if we think about those four learners in planning that lesson or planning that unit of instruction, we can open doors for many other students to engage in the learning in very different ways as well. So again, kind of talking about variability, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think really looking at variability as something that is something we're constantly going to face. And so how do we plan for variability rather than see that as a deficit? And so I really love kind of this slide. So the title is, what does it mean to be disabled? But really the first question, as you go down a little bit further, how do we view and address human variability? And I would say in many circumstances we see that human variability as, sometimes we'll define it as, disability. And so, what role does the context then that we create play? What's the culture, the norm culture? What is the expectation in the classroom? And does that play to some student strengths better than others? And so are we able to modify that context to really meet the needs of the learners in front of us? And do we see this variability as a deficit, or do we see it as an opportunity to really kind of change and enhance our instruction? And so I would invite you to watch this video link that I have with Tad Mackler and Dan Elzy. Again, I think a powerful example of when we view someone as disabled and that they don't have a lot to offer, versus creating a context in which, really their passions, talents, their interests can really be on display, and that we all have just a ton to offer. So thanks for hanging in there with me. I'd be glad to answer any questions, but hopefully this provides an overview to UDL and why we're doing this work, and just gives you some small kind of background knowledge as to when we're talking about UDL, what we're talking about. Thanks, everybody.